Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, and I'm joined today by one of our writers, Alan Levinovitz, who has created kind of a unique piece for us, a comic strip medium format kind of piece. So we're going to dive into that. Before we get into the piece itself, hello, Alan. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Alan Levinovitz. I teach religion at James Madison University, Harrisonburg, Virginia. I was originally hired to teach classical Chinese thought, so that's my area of expertise in my PhD. I've also started to expand out into the overlap of religion, philosophy, science, and medicine. So, for example, I'm teaching a class on religion and mental health right now, which is super interesting to me. I've become a bit of a generalist, which is really fun. It allows me to explore lots of topics I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so to my knowledge, we almost never publish pieces like this, but it's very cool. You've got the words coming from you, the art coming from Jason Novak. I'm curious how this came about. How did you start collaborating with an illustrator and producing content like this?
Jason's an incredible cartoonist. I encourage anyone watching this not only to check out the piece, but check out his other work. He's done incredible stuff. He's got a new book coming out about Kafka's unfinished manuscript. It's a silent, wordless novel. And the thing about Jason is he's a very philosophical artist. And I originally met him. He had read something by me, maybe my book Natural. I don't actually remember exactly what. And he reached out to me and said, "I would love to do an interview with you. And what I do in these interviews is I illustrate them." So that sounds terrific. Let's do it. And he's always interviewing philosophers or scholars, people whose ideas he finds interesting. And there's something about his sparse style that I think really communicates philosophical ideas in a way that you can't get across with mere writing. And he and I have talked about doing lots of different collaborations. We did another one for Christian Century that was web only a little while back. We're going to work on some stuff in the future. But for me, genre is a really important part of what it is to express ideas. In religion, especially, you have parables, you have commandments, you have logic, you have myth, you have history. So, art, of course, is yet another genre. And I felt like this story needed, or this idea, this piece needed people to feel like I was there struggling to work through these ideas. And so just it was a perfect fit for Jason and I to collaborate on. It was really exciting.
That's great. Well, one of the things you're struggling through in this piece and presumably in your profession is this unwritten rule for religion professors that you will teach the students how to think, not what to think. And you say in this particular piece that all religion professors in public schools are in agreement on this. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this idea, this guardrail of the profession, and whether or not you think people are actually abiding by this.
Let me answer that in reverse. People can't abide by this. So in practice, there is simply no way to only teach how to think. You also have to teach what? Obviously, in a class on a biblical history class or a class on biblical Hebrew, whatever it happens to be, there are going to be students in that class whose religious beliefs run counter to whatever it is that professor is teaching. So it's in practice, it is impossible. And yet, as you said, there's this truism that we don't teach students what to think. We are not there to indoctrinate. That's another word that you often hear. We're there to teach critical thinking. We're there to give students the tools to figure out for themselves what they ought to think. And in a sense, it's not just religion professors. I think this is something that humanities professors writ large will say. They will say it's more important to us to give students the tools to think for themselves rather than to tell them what to think. But as my career has gone on, I've just found that truism to be increasingly disingenuous. You can't do that. I'm not just there to teach my students how to think. I also have to tell them what has happened in certain places. I have to tell them that if you think properly, you will end up at these conclusions. There's no separating the two. in the same sense that there is no separating belief and practice, which is another thing that religion professors often want to say. They say, oh, this religion is more about practice. It's not as much about beliefs. Or this particular person is more interested in practices rather than beliefs, or vice versa. And whenever I hear that, I always think to myself, well, how do you know what to practice if you don't know what to believe? And a similar kind of problem runs through what we're doing. And so when I'm in class, what I have to do as a professor is I have to ask myself, is this particular fact, and by fact I mean thing that I know to be true, to the extent that anyone can know something to be true, is this a fact that is up for debate in the way that someone who knows how to think would believe it's up for debate, or is this fact not up for debate? And that's tough because I teach religion and science. So what am I going to do, for example, with belief in ghosts? And to sort of round out this answer, which has gone on for a little bit, one of the things I really try to show my students is that to be critical of beliefs, of certain beliefs, to say this belief is wrong or I don't think this makes sense, is internal to religion as well. In order to respect religion, religions themselves, the religions are the history of the church fathers trying to figure things out, trying to figure out what's right, trying to figure out what's wrong. So, for example, when we do the afterlife, you read these enormous bestsellers, Colton Burpo, Heaven is for Real. I show them that Christian writers are among those who are most concerned to distinguish these books from true Christian doctrine. So it is not some kind of atheist debunking to say, hey, look, this Burpo story, it doesn't make any sense. Here's all the reasons it doesn't make any sense. And if you still think it makes sense, something's gone wrong with the thinking process. So that's something I really try to introduce, this idea that religion is not just about believing whatever. It is, in fact, about distinguishing what you ought to believe from what you shouldn't believe.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. By the by, I really appreciated your reference to the villainous professor in the God's Not Dead movie, and that parents out there are worried that maybe that's who you are. Um, but at the end of the piece, and maybe you answered this a little bit, but at the end of the piece, you pointed out kind of a double standard, like professors in other departments are not being held up against this truism. Um, if you are in the geology or biology department, you can teach that the Earth is much older than 6,000 years old. You might not have as much freedom to say that. So I wonder if you could just anything more you wanted to say about the way that religion professors in particular are kind of held to a different standard from other professors.
Absolutely. There's a very artificial distinction of religious knowledge from other kinds of knowledge. This is something I run into with my students all the time. So they'll say things like, well, sure, I can say something is true or false if it's not a religious claim. So I can say class starts at 3, and if someone says class starts at 4, I can say to them, no, that's wrong because it's not a religious claim. And then students and the population at large, honestly, seem to think that there's a sort of carve out for religious beliefs. And what I try to express to my students is that there is no such thing as a carve out for religious beliefs. Religious texts make historical claims. The Creation Museum makes a slew of empirical claims. Just to say Jesus did X is to make a historical claim. And so what's going on in the religion department, I think, which is actually really awesome, is that because religious beliefs are of deep significance to people in a way that, say, historical beliefs, typically existential significance, in a way that historical beliefs or beliefs about geology or whatever don't tend to be, what religion classes offer is the opportunity to show students that we treat beliefs differently depending on how important they are to the people that hold them. And at the end of the day, it's actually not about whether a belief is religious or not. It is about whether a belief is existentially important or not. And in some areas, we are simply more aware of that existential importance, which is why I love this religion and mental health class. Beliefs about one's mental health disorder status, for example, are existentially important to people. They are part of their identity. And so I really try to bring that home and say, look, what they're doing over in geology feels distant. And what we're doing over here in religion feels personal. And it's not about whether the belief is religious or not. It's about whether it is a part of your identity or not.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you're working through that stuff with your students. That's awesome. Um, Well, anyone out there who missed this piece, you can check it out below. There'll be a link in the video description. And yeah, thanks so much for chatting today, Alan.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me. I really appreciate your publishing this piece. I know it's really out of the box, and so Jason and I were so grateful to y'all, and the art director was awesome. We're just thrilled to have it in the magazine. It's really wonderful.